the universal phone, and the paradox of alienation. Your smartphone connects you to the entire sum of human knowledge, yet here you are, late at night, perhaps feeling profoundly disconnected from anything meaningful. This isn't a personal failure, it's a symptom of something much deeper. Consider the uncanny feeling when your phone dies and you suddenly don't know what to do with your hands. Your attention, your sense of time. That moment of disorientation reveals how completely a single technological logic has colonized your consciousness. The device in your pocket isn't simply a tool you use. It embodies a complete worldview about what technology should be, what efficiency means, what counts as progress. It's the crystallization of centuries of Western philosophical assumptions made tangible. Every smartphone operates according to identical principles: optimization, connectivity, data extraction. Regardless of whether it's assembled in Shenzhen, programmed in Silicon Valley, or used in Lagos. This isn't coincidence. It reflects what Yuk Hui calls technological universalism, the belief that technology develops according to universal laws that transcend cultural difference. Yuk Hui occupies a unique position to diagnose this condition. Born in Hong Kong in 1976, he came of age during the city's handover from British to Chinese rule, a moment when questions about Western modernity versus Chinese tradition weren't abstract philosophy, but everyday reality. He studied computer science before pursuing philosophy at Goldsmiths under Bernhard Stiegler, later conducting research in Germany at Leuphana University, where he obtained his habilitation in philosophy of technology. His work bridges these worlds. He understands Western technology's technical implementation whilst being able to see it through Chinese philosophical frameworks that Western thinkers rarely engaged with. This dual perspective revealed what others missed, that Western philosophy of technology, Heidegger, Simondon, Stiegler assumed technology followed a singular trajectory, never considering that other traditions might offer genuinely different technological rationalities. What Hui discovered isn't just academically interesting. It's urgent. He argues that Western technology has become fundamentally nihilistic, reducing everything to optimization metrics, whilst claiming to be culturally neutral. The same algorithmic logic that maximizes engagement on social media platforms also drives automated trading systems, climate modeling software, and military targeting systems. Different applications. Identical underlying logic. His concept of cosmotechnics offers a way out. The idea that different cultures can and should develop genuinely different technological futures, not simply different interfaces or aesthetics layered over identical computational cores, but technologies that emerge from fundamentally different understandings of what the cosmos is and how humans should relate to it. But to understand his solution, we need to go back to the 20th century philosophers who first diagnosed the problem, who saw that something essential was being lost in our relationship with technical objects. The technical object, Simondon's foundation. Gilbert Simondon, writing in 1958, made a startling claim. We've been thinking about technology completely wrong. We treat machines as mere tools, dead instruments that serve human purposes. But Simondon insisted technical objects have their own mode of existence, their own way of becoming. This wasn't simply philosophical speculation. Simondon was responding to a crisis he saw emerging in post-war France. Humans were becoming alienated from technology precisely because they misunderstood what technology actually is. We imagine ourselves as masters wielding passive instruments, but this misses the fundamental reality of how technical objects actually exist and evolve. He introduced the concept of concretization. the process by which technical objects evolved toward greater internal coherence. Early car engines required separate cooling systems, oil systems, structural supports, each function isolated and often working against the others. Modern engines integrate these functions into unified designs where one component serves multiple purposes simultaneously. The radiator doesn't just cool. It provides structural support. The oil doesn't just lubricate. It transfers heat. The object becomes more concrete as it resolves its internal contradictions. Your laptop's processor demonstrates this perfectly. It generates heat whilst computing seemingly a problem requiring separate cooling solutions. But modern chip design uses that heat intentionally, routing it through pathways that warm other components to optimal operating temperatures. The problem becomes part of the solution. This is concretization in action. This is what Simondon called individuation. Not just the technical improvement of objects, but an ontological process of becoming. Technical objects don't simply get better. They individuate, developing their own organizational logic that can't be reduced to human intentions. The technical object is not this or that thing, given hic et nunc, but that of which there is genesis. Simondon wrote, technical objects are processes, not static things. Crucially, Simondon argued that no technical object exists in isolation. Each requires what he called an associated milieu, a surrounding environment of energy flows, maintenance practices, complementary technologies, and human knowledge. A smartphone only works within a vast infrastructure of satellites, servers, electrical grids, repair networks, and the accumulated knowledge of countless engineers and users. This relational understanding reveals something profound. Technical objects aren't just tools we use. They're participants in ongoing processes of individuation that include us. We co-evolve with our technologies, each shaping the other's becoming. But this raises a deeper, more troubling question, one that would later captivate Yuk Hui. What happens when the entire world is reorganized to serve as the associated milieu for technology itself? What happens when human existence becomes subordinated to the individuation of technical systems? The essence of Western technology, Heidegger's critique. Martin Heidegger drew a sharp distinction between two fundamentally different relationships to technology. Ancient Greek techne wasn't just craft or skill. It was a way of revealing truth, of bringing forth what was latent in materials whilst respecting their nature. A potter worked with clay's inherent properties. A shipbuilder collaborated with wood's grain. There was a kind of listening involved, a responsiveness to what wanted to emerge. Modern technology, modern technique operates on completely different principles. Its essence isn't technological at all, but metaphysical, a way of encountering the world that Heidegger called enframing or Gestel. This is the demand that everything reveal itself as standing reserve, as best stand resources available for extraction and optimization. Under enframing, a river is no longer a river. It becomes potential hydroelectric power. A forest becomes timber yield and carbon offset credits. Humans become human resources, human capital. Even human attention becomes the standing reserve for platform algorithms to optimize and monetize. When you check your screen time statistics, you're encountering yourself as bestand your attention quantified, your daily life reduced to engagement metrics that feed back into algorithms designed to extract more of the same. You've become standing reserve for your own devices. This isn't about evil intentions or corporate greed. It's deeper. Inframing operates at the level of what Heidegger called the clearing of being. It determines what can even show up as real, as mattering. Under its logic, nothing has intrinsic value. Everything exists only as potential input for further optimization. The world becomes a vast machine for converting everything into everything else, with maximum efficiency as the only measure of success. Heidegger saw this as the culmination of Western metaphysics, the endpoint of a 2,500-year trajectory that began with Plato's separation of essence from appearance. Greek techne had maintained a delicate balance, revealing truth whilst letting beings be. But Western thought increasingly demanded that beings justify their existence by their utility, their availability for human projects. Inframing is this demand taken to its logical extreme. The terrifying part isn't just that we're destroying the planet or alienating ourselves, though we're certainly doing both. It's that under inframing, these problems can only appear as technical challenges requiring technical solutions. Climate change becomes a matter of carbon accounting and geoengineering. Social isolation gets solved through better algorithms for connection. The logic that created the problems becomes the only framework for addressing them. But here's what makes Heidegger's analysis both crucial and troubling for someone like Yuk Hui. If inframing is destiny, the inevitable outcome of Western thought, then there's no outside, no alternative. We're trapped within this metaphysical framework, waiting for being to grant us a new beginning. Unless, of course, Heidegger was wrong about it being universal. Unless there were other ways of thinking technology that never fell into this trap. On the existence of digital objects, Hui's first move. Yuk Hui's philosophical project begins with a deceptively simple observation. When you open your phone's photo app and scroll through your images, what exactly are you looking at? That holiday snapshot isn't sitting in a drawer somewhere. It exists simultaneously on your screen, backed up to iCloud, cached on Apple's servers, perhaps synced to Google Photos. The photograph you see is just the surface manifestation of something far more complex, a digital object that challenges our basic assumptions about what it means for something to exist. This was Hui's first major intervention in contemporary philosophy of technology. He recognized that digital objects represent something genuinely new, not just another kind of technical object, but a different order of existence entirely. Where Gilbert Simondon had shown us how technical objects individuate through their relationship with their associated milieu, and Martin Heidegger had revealed how modern technology transforms the world into standing reserve. Hui demonstrated that digital objects do both simultaneously, whilst operating at planetary scale. Consider that holiday photo again. Examine its metadata, GPS coordinates, pinpointing exactly where you stood, timestamp recording the precise moment, device ID identifying your specific phone, algorithmic tags that have already identified faces and objects within the frame. The image you see is merely the surface layer. Underneath lies a rich ontology that makes the photograph searchable, sortable, and crucially, monetizable. That hidden structure of relations, that's the real digital object. Digital objects are constituted by relations rather than substance. When you load a web page, you're witnessing the real-time generation of an object from countless underlying structures. HTML markup defining content hierarchy, CSS styling determining visual presentation, database queries pulling specific information, API calls connecting to external services. The page doesn't exist until these relations converge in the moment of your request. Close the browser tab, and the object dissolves back into potential. This relational constitution creates what Hui calls tertiary pretension, building on Bernard Stiegler's concept of tertiary retention, where Stiegler showed how technical objects externalize human memory, how writing, recording, and digital storage allow us to retain what would otherwise be forgotten. Hui demonstrates how digital systems actively anticipate and structure future possibilities. Your search history doesn't merely record past queries, it fundamentally shapes what results you'll see next, what recommendations appear, what futures become available to you. The 2024 controversies over AI training data make this dynamic starkly visible. Every image uploaded to social platforms becomes potential training material for computer vision systems. Every text posted online gets harvested as fodder for large language models. Digital objects don't simply exist in static form. They're constantly being ingested, recombined, and fed back into systems that generate new objects. The standing reserve that Heidegger identified has gone recursive. This recursivity operates at unprecedented scale. Your digital photograph doesn't just sit passively in storage. It gets analyzed by facial recognition algorithms, cross-referenced with location databases, fed into advertising targeting systems, potentially scraped for AI training datasets. Each interaction generates new metadata, new relations, new digital objects that didn't exist moments before. The photograph becomes a node in an ever-expanding network of computational processes. But here's where Hui's analysis becomes genuinely unsettling. If Simondon revealed how technical objects individuate through their milieu, and Heidegger showed how modern technology enframes the world as standing reserve, digital objects appear to combine both processes whilst eliminating any outside. They individuate recursively each digital object, potentially becoming the milieu for generating countless others, while simultaneously treating everything, including themselves, as manipulable resource. This raises an uncomfortable question that haunts Hui's entire philosophical project. Is there any way to think technology that doesn't lead inevitably toward this universal machine? Can we conceive of technical development that doesn't culminate in planetary computation, where every object becomes a digital object subject to algorithmic processing? The question becomes urgent when we realize that digital objects aren't confined to screens and servers. Internet of Things devices embed computational capacity into physical infrastructure. Smart cities promise to make urban environments responsive to real-time data flows. Even biological processes become digital objects through genomic sequencing and bioinformatics. The boundary between digital and physical dissolves as everything becomes, in principle, computationally tractable. Hui's recognition of digital objects' unique ontological status sets the stage for his broader critique of technological universalism. If Western modernity has indeed produced a form of technology that tends toward planetary homogenization, turning everything into standing reserve, making everything computable, then perhaps the problem lies deeper than particular technologies or applications. Perhaps we need to question the cosmological assumptions that make such technology seem inevitable. The Antinomy of Technology. Yuk Hui identifies a fundamental contradiction at the heart of how we think about technology, and it's one that becomes more puzzling the more carefully you examine it. On one hand, we take it as obvious that technology is anthropologically universal. Humans everywhere and always use tools, develop techniques, modify their environment to meet their needs. This seems like basic common sense. What could be more human than the capacity to create and use technology? Yet, when we look at the actual technological world we inhabit today, we encounter something rather strange. Despite the immense cultural diversity that still exists across the globe, there's effectively only one type of technology. Whether you're in Tokyo, Toronto, or Nairobi, you encounter the same smartphones, the same software interfaces, the same optimization logic. The apps might have different languages. The regulations might vary slightly, but the fundamental structure is identical. This paradox reveals something crucial about our moment. Whilst the capacity for technology may indeed be universal, the specific form it takes certainly isn't predetermined by human nature. What we're witnessing is the successful globalization of one particular way of developing technology, the Western modern approach that Heidegger called inframing, where everything becomes standing reserve to be optimized and extracted from. The US-China tech rivalry of 2024 to 2025 makes this visible in fascinating ways. Despite all the geopolitical tensions and competing visions of digital governance, both powers operate within fundamentally the same framework: platform capitalism, algorithmic management, data extraction as value creation. They're competing over who controls the universal machine, not over whether there should be alternatives to it. Visit any major city worldwide, and you'll see how public space has been reorganized around identical technological infrastructure. QR codes, contactless payment, facial recognition systems, smartphone-dependent services. The interfaces may display different languages, but the underlying logic is the same everywhere. Optimized flows, quantified behavior, frictionless extraction. What both Western philosophy and global capitalism have systematically eliminated is what Hui calls the cosmic dimension of technology. This is the idea that technical activity might be constrained by and expressive of a larger understanding of the universe and humanity's place within it. Instead, we've accepted that there's only one rational way to develop technology, and it happens to be the way that emerged from a very specific historical trajectory in Western Europe. This creates what Hui calls the antinomy of technology. We simultaneously believe technology is universal, whilst living in a world where technological diversity has been almost completely eliminated. We think we're seeing human nature express itself through technology, but we're actually witnessing the planetary imposition of one cosmotechnical framework that claims to be the only possible one. The loss of the cosmos. When Yuk Hui speaks of the loss of the cosmos, he's pointing to something far more profound than environmental degradation or space exploration. He means the disappearance of a unified understanding where technical activity served larger purposes, where making things was inseparable from questions about how we should live and what the universe itself demands of us. This wasn't always the case. In pre-modern thought, whether Greek, Chinese, or Islamic, technology operated within cosmological frameworks. Greek techne wasn't separate from questions of virtue and the good life. A craftsman didn't simply make useful objects. They participated in bringing forth the potential inherent in materials, guided by understanding of form, purpose, and excellence. Chinese craftsmanship developed within Taoist and Confucian frameworks about harmony with natural patterns. The carpenter worked with the grain of wood, not merely for efficiency, but because this expressed deeper truths about following the way. Islamic science flourished within theological constraints about divine creation. Where investigation of natural laws was itself a form of worship. The modern scientific revolution severed these connections. nature became something to be studied objectively, independent of moral or cosmological concerns. Technology became judged solely on whether it works, not on whether it's good, meaningful, or appropriate to the larger order of things. This separation produces what Hui identifies as a peculiar blindness, technology that is extraordinarily powerful functionally, whilst being completely deaf to ethical and existential questions. We can engineer almost anything now. Social media platforms that exploit psychological vulnerabilities to maximize engagement, surveillance systems that track every movement and preference. The development of CRISPR gene editing technology illustrates this perfectly. We can now rewrite the human genome, but our decision-making framework extends only to, can we do it safely? And is it legally permitted? Never to deeper questions about what human nature should be, or what limits the cosmos itself might impose. This produces what Hui calls the Europeanization of the Earth, the globalization of a specifically Western form of technology that recognizes no limits except technical feasibility. This isn't colonialism in the traditional sense. It's something stranger, the universalization of a provincial worldview that doesn't recognize itself as provincial. Every culture now adopts the same smartphones, the same internet protocols, the same artificial intelligence architectures, as if these represented the only possible relationship between humans and technical objects. The result is a world where technical development proceeds according to its own logic, disconnected from any larger understanding of cosmic order or human purpose. The question is no longer whether we can develop this or that technology, but whether we can still think technologically in ways that aren't already determined by the European schema. Recursivity and the automation of thought. We arrive now at perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Hui's analysis: recursivity. This isn't merely a technical concept borrowed from computer science, but the fundamental logic that has come to govern how contemporary technology operates, and increasingly, how we think and live within its parameters. Recursivity describes systems that feed their outputs back into themselves as inputs, creating self-referential loops that constantly modify their own behavior. Think of how your smartphone's recommendation algorithm learns your habits. This is recursivity in action. It feeds on its own outputs to refine future suggestions, creating a closed loop that narrows rather than expands your world. Each recommendation you accept teaches it to give you more of the same, creating an increasingly sealed chamber. But recursivity runs much deeper than our personal devices. It's the organizing principle of cybernetics, that science of control and communication that emerged from wartime research in the 1940 seconds. Cybernetic thinking treats all complex systems, biological, social, technical, as information processes that self-regulate through feedback. What began as a method for improving anti-aircraft targeting systems has become the template for understanding everything from ecosystems to economies. Modern digital platforms are recursivity made concrete. Your Netflix recommendations emerge from your viewing history, which shapes what you watch next, which refines the recommendations further. Your social media feed learns from your engagement patterns to show you content that maximizes engagement, which teaches it more about your patterns. Each loop narrows and intensifies, creating what Hui calls automated thought cognition that operates according to pre-programmed parameters rather than genuine reflection. The emergence of large language models in 2023 and 2024 represents recursivity's culmination. These AI systems are trained on human-generated text and now generate text that humans read and respond to, which becomes training data for future models. We're caught in a recursive loop where the distinction between human and machine-generated culture increasingly collapses. When ChatGPT writes an essay that a student submits, which gets graded by an AI system, which generates feedback that trains the next iteration of the model, where exactly does human thought end and automated processing begin? What makes recursivity particularly troubling for Hui is the question of contingency, the impossibility of predicting where these self-modifying systems will go. When AI systems begin optimizing based on their own internal metrics rather than human-specified goals, when financial markets respond to algorithmic trading faster than humans can comprehend, control slips away. The system becomes autonomous, not through consciousness, but through recursive complexity. This automation of thought represents what Hui sees as the ultimate expression of Western techniques' nihilistic trajectory. Rather than enhancing human capability, recursive systems gradually replace human judgment with algorithmic optimization. We don't simply use these technologies, we're incorporated into their feedback loops, becoming components in vast recursive machines that operate according to logics we neither fully understand nor control. The political implications are staggering. Democratic deliberation requires the kind of open-ended reflection that recursivity forecloses. When our information environments are shaped by algorithms optimizing for engagement rather than truth, when our social connections are mediated by platforms that profit from division, the very possibility of collective wisdom erodes. Yet Hui doesn't advocate simply rejecting these technologies. The recursive logic is too deeply embedded in contemporary infrastructure for that to be viable. Instead, he calls for developing what he terms cosmotechnical recursivity, forms of technological self-organization that operate according to different values and temporalities that remain open to cosmic forces beyond mere optimization. This points toward one of the most challenging aspects of Hui's project: imagining technological futures that harness recursivity's power, whilst escaping its nihilistic closure. How might recursive systems serve cosmotechnical rather than purely instrumental ends? How might feedback loops enhance rather than diminish human agency? These questions become more urgent as recursivity accelerates and intensifies around us, as the loops tighten and the space for human reflection contracts. The Anthropocene and the technological system. The Anthropocene, the geological epoch defined by human impact on Earth systems, is fundamentally a technological crisis. It's not humanity in general that has altered the planet's climate, chemistry, and biology, but a specific technological modernity that treats nature as standing reserve. This distinction matters enormously for how we understand both the problem and potential solutions. Hui argues we should more accurately call it the Technocene, an age defined not by human nature, but by a particular form of technological rationality. The recursive, self-regulating, cosmically blind system we've been exploring didn't evolve naturally. It was constructed through specific historical choices that could have gone differently. Global capitalism functions as what Lewis Mumford called a mega-machine, a vast socio-technical system that coordinates human and technological components into a single apparatus of extraction and accumulation. Individual humans become cogs in this machine, their agency absorbed into its recursive operations. Your morning commute, your smartphone notifications, your work productivity metrics all become data points, feeding the system's optimization algorithms. The 2024 UN climate negotiations revealed the depth of the problem. Even with overwhelming scientific consensus and visible ecological breakdown, the system proves unable to transform itself. Why? Because transformation would require questioning the fundamental logic of optimization, efficiency, growth, the very premises of technological modernity. Notice how climate change gets framed as a carbon problem solvable through technical optimization. Carbon capture, renewable energy, electric vehicles. These solutions operate entirely within enframing logic, nature as resource to be managed more efficiently, whilst never questioning whether the fundamental relationship needs transformation. This is where Hui's analysis becomes crucial. The Anthropocene isn't an unfortunate side effect of technology. It's the logical outcome of a specific cosmotechnics that reduces reality to calculable resources. The same logic that optimizes your social media feed for engagement also optimizes forests for carbon sequestration, treating both as systems to be managed rather than worlds to inhabit. But if one cosmotechnics created the Anthropocene, perhaps different cosmotechnics could address it. This brings us to the heart of Hui's project, understanding what cosmotechnics actually means and why it offers hope for thinking beyond our current technological predicament. Defining cosmotechnics. Dao-Qi. Synthesis. At the heart of Yuk Hui's philosophical project lies a deceptively simple yet revolutionary concept: cosmotechnics. He defines it as the unification of the cosmic order and the moral order through technical activities. This definition might seem straightforward, but it fundamentally challenges everything we assume about how technology relates to culture, morality, and our understanding of reality itself. When Hui speaks of cosmotechnics, he's making a radical claim. Technology isn't a neutral tool that different cultures simply use differently. Rather, every technical object, every technological practice embodies specific metaphysical commitments about the nature of reality. Your smartphone doesn't just connect you to networks, it materializes particular assumptions about time, space, efficiency, and what human flourishing means. Each culture develops its own cosmotechnics, expressing their cosmic understanding through technical practices. This becomes clearer when we examine the Chinese philosophical framework that Hui draws upon, particularly the concepts of Dao and Qi. The Dao isn't a thing or a law in the Western sense, it's the dynamic pattern of reality itself, the way things naturally unfold and interconnect. Think of it as the underlying rhythm or tendency that runs through all existence, not imposed from outside, but emerging from the relationships between things. Qi, meanwhile, represents the capacity for affecting and being affected, the energetic potential that flows through all phenomena. In Chinese cosmotechnics, technical objects become condensations of qi that should align with the Tao. This means technology isn't about imposing human will upon passive matter, but about working with the natural tendencies and patterns already present in the world. Consider traditional Chinese landscape gardens as a concrete example. These spaces demonstrate cosmotechnics in action. Rocks, water, and plants are arranged not to impose geometric order, but to reveal and intensify natural patterns. The technical practice of garden making serves the cosmic goal of manifesting the Tao. Every placement, every pathway, works with existing topography and seasonal rhythms rather than against them. The gardener's skill lies in recognizing and amplifying what wants to emerge naturally. This contrasts sharply with Western approaches, where Greek and European thought increasingly severed technology from cosmological frameworks. In the Western tradition, technical objects came to be judged solely on their efficiency and utility, divorced from questions of cosmic harmony or moral order. A Western garden might impose perfect symmetry and geometric patterns, demonstrating human mastery over nature rather than collaboration with it. The implications are profound. If Chinese thought historically developed different cosmotechnics from Greek and European traditions, then our current technological predicament isn't inevitable. The enframing that Heidegger diagnosed technology's reduction of everything to standing reserve represents one possible cosmotechnics, not the only one. The apparent universality of Western technology is a historical contingency, not an ontological necessity. This opens up extraordinary possibilities. When we recognize that Chinese cosmotechnics historically constrained technical development by requiring harmony with cosmic patterns, we begin to see that other technological worlds remain possible. The question becomes whether such alternatives can still emerge within our current planetary technological system, or whether the momentum of Western cosmotechnics has become too totalizing. To understand how different cosmic constraints actually produce different technologies throughout history, we need concrete examples of cosmotechnics in practice. But we also need to grapple with the political question of whether technodiversity can survive the homogenizing forces of global capitalism and algorithmic governance. The Chinese cosmotechnics. Case study. To make cosmotechnics concrete, we need to examine how it actually functioned in a specific cultural context. Traditional Chinese medicine offers perhaps the clearest example. Rather than treating the body as a machine with replaceable parts, the dominant Western medical model, it understands health as the harmonious flow of qi through meridians. Technical interventions like acupuncture, herbal medicine, and qigong aim to restore balance rather than simply eliminate symptoms. The needle isn't just piercing flesh. It's participating in a cosmic conversation about energy flow and natural harmony. This approach extends throughout Chinese technical culture. The classical text, Tiangong Kaiwu, or Exploitation of the Works of Nature, compiled in 1637, serves as a fascinating technical encyclopedia covering everything from agriculture and metallurgy to ceramics and textile production. But what's remarkable is how it consistently emphasizes working with natural tendencies rather than against them. Metalworking isn't about forcing materials into arbitrary shapes, but discovering what each alloy naturally wants to become. The craftsman becomes a collaborator with cosmic forces rather than their master. Central to this entire framework is the concept of Ganying mutual resonance or sympathetic response. In Chinese cosmotechnics, technical objects aren't dead instruments, but active participants in a field of relations. A bell doesn't just produce sound through mechanical vibration. It resonates with cosmic patterns, participating in the larger harmony of heaven and earth. A properly crafted tool vibrates in sympathy with both its maker and its material, creating what we might call a technical ecology rather than a mere instrumental relationship. Consider feng shui, often dismissed in the West as mere superstition. It's actually sophisticated cosmotechnical practice, simultaneously technical, requiring precise measurement and spatial arrangement, whilst being thoroughly embedded in cosmology, aligning structures with flows of qi to harmonize with the Tao. It represents technology as cosmic attunement rather than domination, as participation in natural order rather than its conquest. This isn't romantic nostalgia for pre-modern technology. Hui emphasizes that Chinese cosmotechnics produced genuine technical achievements: printing, gunpowder, advanced metallurgy, sophisticated agricultural innovations, but within a fundamentally different framework of meaning and purpose. Technology served cosmic moral goals rather than pure efficiency or profit maximization. As Hui puts it, Chinese technology has always been constrained by the notion of Dao, which limits the autonomy of technology and demands its harmonization with the cosmic order. The tragedy, according to Hui, is that colonialism and forced modernization compelled China and other non-Western societies to adopt European technological models simply to survive economically and militarily. The question that haunts his work is whether these alternative cosmotechnics can be reconstructed and meaningfully applied to digital technology, or whether that possibility has been permanently foreclosed by the global dominance of Western technological rationality. Can we imagine artificial intelligence guided by principles of Ganying rather than optimization? Can we develop digital platforms that serve cosmic harmony rather than engagement metrics? Rethinking AI through Technodiversity. Contemporary AI development perfectly demonstrates the problem Hui identifies with devastating clarity. Despite being developed by researchers from vastly diverse cultural backgrounds, teams in Beijing, Bangalore, San Francisco, and London AI systems universally embody the same Cartesian assumptions that have dominated Western thought for centuries. Every algorithm treats intelligence as rational calculation. Every neural network assumes mind-body dualism. Every optimization function treats efficiency as virtue. They're quite literally enframing, encoded into executable code. Heidegger's Gestell made manifest in silicon and statistics. Consider how machine learning systems approach the world. Language becomes tokens to be processed. Images become pixel arrays to be classified. Human behavior becomes data points to be predicted. Everything, your conversations, your photographs, your movements through the city, gets reduced to standing reserve more efficiently than any previous technology in human history. The algorithm doesn't see your words as meaningful expressions of lived experience. It sees statistical patterns to be extracted and manipulated. This isn't a bug in the system, it's the system working exactly as designed. What makes this particularly striking is how this logic has universalized across supposedly different technological cultures. Chinese AI companies like Baidu and Alibaba operate with identical technical rationality to Google and Meta. Their algorithms optimize for the same metrics. Their neural networks use the same architectures. Their data harvesting follows the same extractive patterns. The fact that these systems emerged from radically different philosophical traditions, Confucian harmony, Taoist flow, Buddhist interdependence, yet converge on identical technical solutions, proves Hui's point about the universalization of Western technological rationality. The megamachine has successfully colonized every other cosmotechnics. But Hui's concept of technodiversity offers a genuinely radical alternative. What if different cultures developed AI based on completely different cosmotechnical premises, not merely different applications of the same underlying technology, Chinese social credit systems versus American advertising algorithms, but incompatible technical systems expressing incompatible worldviews about what intelligence means, what data is, what technology should do. Imagine an AI system designed from Buddhist principles about consciousness and interdependence rather than Cartesian rationalism. It wouldn't optimize for individual preferences, but for collective awakening. It wouldn't maximize engagement, but minimize attachment. It wouldn't treat users as isolated rational actors, but as interconnected nodes in a web of mutual dependence. Such a system would be genuinely incompatible with platform capitalism, which is precisely why it doesn't exist and likely never will under current conditions. The indigenous data sovereignty movement, emerging across 2024, provides a concrete example of what technodiversity might look like in practice. Indigenous communities in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand are asserting that data about their lands, languages, and cultural practices should be governed by indigenous principles: relationality, reciprocity, collective ownership, rather than Western property law and extractive logic. They're not just demanding better privacy protection. They're challenging the fundamental assumptions about what data is and how it should relate to human communities. These communities understand data as living, relational, connected to place and kinship networks in ways that make individual ownership nonsensical. Their approach to information technology emphasizes collective decision-making, ceremonial protocols, and responsibility to future generations. This isn't simply a different application of digital technology, it's a different Cosmotechnics entirely, one that would produce genuinely different technical systems if allowed to develop according to its own logic. But here's the uncomfortable tension that Hui forces us to confront. Can such alternatives actually survive and scale in a world dominated by recursive, universalizing technological systems? Every indigenous community asserting data sovereignty still operates within a global internet infrastructure built on TCP divided by IP protocols, runs on servers manufactured according to Western engineering principles, and interfaces with legal systems based on European concepts of property and jurisdiction. The megamachine doesn't just dominate through force, it dominates through infrastructure, through the technical standards that make communication and coordination possible. This raises the most challenging question in Hui's entire project. Does genuine technodiversity require something even more radical than developing alternative technologies? Does it require the active resistance to and dismantling of the global megamachine itself? And if so, how do we navigate the paradox that such resistance would likely require coordinating through the very technological systems we're trying to escape? The recursivity of digital objects ensures that even our opposition gets captured and channeled back into the system we're opposing. Art as the transformation of technology. Most discussions of art and technology focus on artists using new media, VR installations, generative art, digital sculpture. Hui argues for something more radical: art that transforms technology's essence rather than merely adopting its tools. This isn't about making pretty things with computers, it's about whether aesthetic practice can crack open technological rationality itself. Heidegger suggested that art might offer a way beyond inframing because aesthetic experience resists calculation. A painting can't be reduced to optimization metrics. A poem doesn't produce quantifiable value. Art preserves space for the unknown, for what exceeds instrumental rationality. When you encounter a work that genuinely moves you, something happens that can't be captured in data points or performance indicators. For Hui, this means art can become a site for experimenting with alternative cosmotechnics. Artists working with code, algorithms, and digital systems can explore what these technologies might do beyond optimization, how they might serve goals like beauty, meaning, ritual, or cosmic attunement, rather than efficiency. Think of glitch art, where artists deliberately introduce errors, corruptions, and failures into digital systems. By making the invisible infrastructure visible, by celebrating what algorithms reject as noise, they create moments where technology's logic stutters and alternatives briefly flash into view. But there's constant tension here. The art world itself operates within capitalist logic. NFTs, digital art markets, algorithmic curation on Instagram, determining which works get seen. Even the most experimental practices get recuperated into what Hui calls the mega machine. Your radical digital intervention becomes content for the platform. Your critique of surveillance capitalism gets monetized through targeted advertising. The question becomes whether art can maintain genuine alterity or whether it's always already absorbed. Can artistic practice create spaces where technology operates according to different principles? Or does the recursive structure of digital systems eventually colonize every attempt at resistance? This connects to a larger problem that haunts Hui's entire project. If recursivity colonizes thought itself, if our very capacity to imagine alternatives is shaped by algorithmic systems, how can we think outside the closure? The recommendation engines that curate our cultural consumption, the search algorithms that mediate our research, the social platforms that structure our conversations. All of this shapes not just what we think about, but how we think. This requires not just new technologies, but new modes of thinking. What Hui calls thinking after technics. Art becomes crucial here, not as decoration for technological society, but as a laboratory for experimenting with different ways of relating to the technical. The individuation of thinking. Returning to Simondon's concept of individuation, the process by which things become themselves through resolving internal tensions, Hui argues this must happen at the level of thought itself. Our concepts, our ways of understanding technology, need to individuate. They need to break free from the universalized philosophical vocabulary we've inherited and develop along genuinely different trajectories. This isn't simply about translation difficulties. When we use terms like nature, technology, individual, or progress, we're carrying specific Western metaphysical baggage. These concepts emerged from particular historical conditions: Greek substance, ontology, Christian teleology, modern mechanistic science. When Chinese or Islamic or indigenous thinkers are forced to use this vocabulary, they're squeezed into conceptual frameworks that fundamentally don't fit their traditions. Consider what happens when Western physicists encountered quantum mechanics. They struggled desperately to explain phenomena like entanglement and superposition using classical concepts of discrete particles and linear causation. Some, like Niels Bohr, eventually turned to Eastern philosophy, finding that Taoist notions of complementarity and interdependence offered better conceptual resources than anything in the Western tradition. This suggests Western thought doesn't have a monopoly on rigorous understanding. It might actually be inadequate for certain domains of reality. Hui calls for what he terms epistemological diplomacy, the difficult work of translating between incommensurable knowledge systems without reducing one to the other. This isn't multiculturalism, which celebrates diversity whilst maintaining Western frameworks as the neutral ground for comparison. It's genuine intellectual pluralism, where different systems remain productively incompatible, each offering insights the others cannot access. The challenge is immense. How do you explain Dao to someone whose entire conceptual apparatus is built on being and becoming? How do you translate Ganying, the Chinese concept of sympathetic resonance between all things, into a language fundamentally structured by subject-object dualism? These aren't just communication problems. They're ontological incommensurabilities that resist any easy resolution. Yet this difficulty is precisely the point. If epistemological diplomacy were straightforward, if all concepts translated smoothly across traditions, that would actually prove the universality of one particular framework. The friction, the untranslatability, the productive incompatibilities, these indicate that genuine plurality still exists in the world, waiting to be cultivated rather than homogenized. As Hui puts it, We must learn to think with fragments of different traditions without attempting to synthesize them into a new totality. This fragmentation isn't a failure of philosophical ambition. It's a political necessity. The moment we create a new synthesis, a new universal framework that supposedly incorporates all traditions, we've simply created another form of technological universalism, more sophisticated perhaps, but equally totalizing. The individuation of thinking means allowing concepts to develop along their own trajectories in response to their own internal tensions and cultural contexts. It means accepting that there might be genuinely different ways of understanding what technology is, what nature means, what constitutes rational thought, and crucially, it means recognizing that this conceptual diversity isn't just intellectually interesting. It's essential for any politics that hopes to resist the convergent technological future currently being imposed on the planet. This sets up the fundamental political question. Can thinking individuate fast enough to keep pace with technological convergence? Or will planetary computation flatten all conceptual diversity before alternative frameworks can fully emerge? The plurality of techno-futures. Here, we reach perhaps the most politically urgent aspect of Hui's Cosmotechnics. His insistence that the future must be plural, not singular. This directly confronts two dominant fantasies of our technological moment: accelerationism and the singularity, both of which assume that all paths ultimately converge toward one inevitable endpoint. Accelerationism, whether in its left or right variants, accepts the universality of Western technological rationality and simply demands we go faster. It's the belief that we should intensify capitalism and technology to reach some post-scarcity, post-human future. For accelerationists, the recursive mega-machine isn't the problem. It's the solution, if only we can push it to its logical conclusion. Hui rejects this entirely. Accelerationism remains trapped within European universalism, unable to imagine genuinely different technological futures. It mistakes speed for transformation, intensity for diversity. The singularity represents an even more extreme version of this convergent thinking, the fantasy that all AI development must ultimately collapse into a single, superintelligent endpoint. It's technological monotheism, the final expression of the European dream that diversity must ultimately resolve into unity. Against both these convergent fantasies, Hui advocates for divergence. The goal isn't one techno-future, but many incompatible futures, each expressing different cosmotechnics. This makes technodiversity fundamentally political. It requires actively resisting the homogenizing pressure of global capitalism and its recursive systems. Consider what genuine incompatibility might mean. The European Union's 2024 AI Act and China's algorithmic governance frameworks both attempt to regulate artificial intelligence, yet both operate within the same optimization paradigm, managing risks whilst maintaining technological growth. True technodiversity would mean AI systems so fundamentally different that they couldn't be regulated by the same frameworks at all. A technology based on indigenous relationality might be incompatible with one based on Islamic theology or Confucian ethics. They wouldn't just be different applications of the same underlying logic. They'd express radically different answers to questions like, what is an individual? What is time? What matters most? These aren't technical differences, but cosmological ones. Yet this raises the most urgent question of our moment. Is such plurality still possible, or has the window already closed? Has recursive technological universalism achieved such planetary dominance that genuine alternatives can no longer emerge? The infrastructure is already laid: the cables, satellites, server farms, standardized protocols. The economic pressures are immense. The climate crisis demands rapid coordination at global scale. Or does this very crisis create openings for radical divergence? As the contradictions of universal technology become undeniable: ecological collapse, social fragmentation, the failure of techno-optimism, might space emerge for genuinely different technological futures. This is where Hui's philosophy becomes not just descriptive, but prescriptive, not just analysis, but political program. Questioning modernity's end. There's a persistent narrative that modernity has ended, that we've entered post-modernity, the information age, the Anthropocene, whatever label you prefer. Hui argues this is profound self-deception. Modernity didn't end, it became planetary. What we're witnessing isn't the arrival of something new, but the completion of something very old. The universalization of European modernity's particular crisis. This isn't about Europeans losing geopolitical power, though that's certainly happening. It's about something more fundamental: the ontological colonization of possible ways of being by a single technological rationality. The alienation, nihilism, and ecological destruction produced by enframing aren't Western problems anymore. They're global conditions. Every smartphone operates according to the same recursive logic. Every AI system optimizes according to the same mathematical principles. Every social media platform shapes human behavior through identical mechanisms of capture and prediction. Consider China's social credit system, often presented as distinctively Chinese technology. But examine its actual logic: quantifying behavior, optimizing compliance, reducing persons to data profiles. It's enframing with Chinese characteristics, not a different Cosmotechnics. The algorithms that score citizens in Beijing operate according to the same fundamental principles as those that determine your credit rating in London or your recommendation feed in Los Angeles. The question Hui poses is whether China or any society could develop technologies that aren't simply authoritarian or capitalist versions of Silicon Valley. This is what Hui means by the post-European condition. It's not that Europe has become irrelevant, but that the urgent task of thinking and building technology beyond the Greek and German philosophical inheritance that shaped Western modernity must now be genuinely global. Yet this can't be another universalizing project, another attempt to create a single, correct way of relating technologically to the world. The rise of BRICS nations as alternative centers of power might suggest post-European futures emerging. Brazil's digital governance models, India's approach to AI regulation, South Africa's renewable energy transitions, these could represent different modernities. But Hui remains deeply skeptical. Are these actually different Cosmotechnics? Or just non-Western countries replicating Western technological models under different political management? The test is cosmotechnical. Do these societies develop technologies that express genuinely different cosmic moral orders? Or do they simply deploy the same recursive, optimizing, enframing systems whilst claiming cultural uniqueness? When India develops its own social media platforms, do they operate according to different logics of human connection? Or do they simply compete with Facebook using identical mechanisms of attention capture? This uncertainty is crucial. It means the future remains genuinely open, or we're witnessing the final closure of that openness. The danger isn't just that Western technology dominates globally, but that even societies with rich alternative philosophical traditions find themselves unable to translate those traditions into genuinely different technological forms. The post-European condition is thus both an opportunity and a crisis. It's the moment when thinking beyond European modernity becomes not just intellectually interesting, but practically urgent for planetary survival. Yet it's also the moment when such thinking faces its greatest obstacles, because European modernity's technological forms have become the seemingly natural infrastructure of global life. This is why Hui's project can't remain purely philosophical. The question of whether post-European cosmotechnics are possible isn't just theoretical, it's being answered right now, in every decision about how to build and deploy technology, in every choice about what forms of life our tools will enable or foreclose. Reinventing sovereignty. The nation-state and modern technology didn't just happen to emerge at the same time, they're fundamentally intertwined. When we think of sovereignty in the traditional Westphalian sense, we imagine supreme authority within clearly defined territorial borders. But this entire framework starts to break down when you're dealing with technologies that inherently transcend those borders. Data flows don't stop at customs checkpoints. Satellite networks orbit above national airspace. Climate systems operate on planetary scales. AI training datasets pull information from everywhere and nowhere at once. Yet the instinctive political response to technological anxiety is often to try reasserting national control. We see this everywhere. Data localization laws requiring companies to store information within national borders. Governments declaring they need national champions in artificial intelligence. Attempts to build digital borders that mirror physical ones. But these efforts tend to fail in revealing ways. Either they can't actually control the planetary systems they're trying to govern, or they succeed only by recreating authoritarian control without challenging the underlying technological logic. The problem is that sovereignty gets framed as controlling the mega-machine rather than imagining alternatives to it. You end up with the same extractive, homogenizing technological systems just under different flags. Hui suggests we need something entirely different: techno-ecological alliances. These would be governance structures that operate at scales appropriate to the technical and ecological systems they're trying to coordinate, rather than being constrained by arbitrary national borders. A watershed has its own geography. A data network has its own topology. An AI system has its own distributed architecture. Why should these be governed by institutions designed for territorial control in the 17th century? This points towards radically decentralized, distributed forms of political organization. Instead of trying to squeeze planetary technologies into national containers, you'd have local communities developing and maintaining their own cosmotechnics. Not nationalism, which still operates within the modern framework of sovereignty, but something more like a pluralistic federalism of incompatible technical systems. Think about how the internet was originally designed. It was supposed to root around damage, to be fundamentally ungovernable by any central authority. Yet, within just a few decades, it became dominated by a handful of platform monopolies and subjected to comprehensive national surveillance systems. This reveals something crucial about how difficult it is to build truly decentralized alternatives when concentrated power can always co-opt or crush emerging systems. The challenge Hui identifies is structural. To create these new forms of techno-ecological governance, you'd need to dismantle or fundamentally transform the very institutions, nation-states, corporations, international bodies that currently have the power to create anything at all. It's the classic problem of using the master's tools to build something other than the master's house. But perhaps this is where Cosmotechnics offers a different approach. Rather than trying to build alternative institutions from scratch, you start by cultivating different relationships between cosmic order and technical practice at the local level. Communities begin developing their own ways of integrating technology with their particular understanding of what it means to live well in a specific place. These wouldn't be isolated experiments in digital detox or appropriate technology. They'd be serious attempts to develop technical systems that embody different values, different ways of organizing social and ecological relationships. Over time, these local cosmotechnics might begin to network with each other, creating new forms of political organization that bypass rather than directly challenge existing power structures. The question is whether there's enough time for such experiments to mature before the current trajectory of technological development forecloses other possibilities entirely. The moral imperative of technology. Everything we've explored through Hui's philosophy leads to a single, unavoidable conclusion. Technology is not and cannot be neutral. Every technical system embodies metaphysical commitments, expresses moral values, shapes what counts as real and what matters. The smartphone in your pocket doesn't just connect you to networks. It materializes a particular understanding of time, attention, and human relationship. The algorithms sorting your social media feeds aren't just processing information. They're enacting theories about what knowledge is, how community forms, what deserves visibility. The claim of technological neutrality is itself an ideology, the ideology of inframing. It's the story modern technics tells about itself to avoid acknowledging its own cosmic commitments, its own moral implications. But as we've seen, Western technology is thoroughly committed to a specific cosmotechnics, one that reduces the world to calculable resources, that treats efficiency as the highest value, that subordinates all other considerations to the logic of optimization and control. This means the task ahead isn't primarily technical, but philosophical and political. It's what Hui calls the cultivation of technological thinking. Thinking that can imagine technology otherwise. Not thinking about technology from the outside, but thinking within technological activity that remains open to different cosmic and moral orientations. Thinking that refuses the closure of the universal machine. Consider what this might look like in practice. A community-owned solar microgrid designed by indigenous engineers that operates according to seasonal ceremonies, distributing power based on communal need rather than individual payment capacity. This would be technology as moral cosmic practice, fundamentally incompatible with for-profit utilities optimizing shareholder returns. The technical specifications might be similar, but the cosmotechnical orientation transforms everything: the relationship between human and natural rhythms, the meaning of energy itself, the social bonds that technical activity creates and maintains. This is why Hui insists that cultivating technodiversity requires actively nurturing different ways of relating technical activity to cosmic and moral orders. It's not enough to critique Western technology. We must participate in the practical elaboration of alternatives. This means supporting indigenous communities, developing technologies aligned with their cosmologies. It means fostering African innovations that embed Ubuntu philosophy in digital platforms. It means creating space for Chinese approaches to artificial intelligence that incorporate concepts like Qi and Ganying, rather than reducing intelligence to computational processing. But this cultivation cannot be romantic or nostalgic. We're not trying to return to pre-modern technologies that's impossible and undesirable. We're working toward what Hui calls technological thinking, that can operate within contemporary technical conditions whilst refusing their cosmotechnical closure. Technology that actively serves the plurality of human and non-human worlds, rather than reducing everything to standing reserve. Not technology that solves problems, but technology that maintains relations, that preserves mystery, that honors limits. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Anthropocene crisis demonstrates that the current technological system is driving toward ecological and existential catastrophe. Climate change, mass extinction, social fragmentation, these aren't unfortunate side effects of otherwise beneficial technological development. They're the logical outcomes of a cosmotechnics that treats the Earth as resource, that subordinates all value to efficiency, that cannot recognize limits or relations it cannot control. As Hui puts it, the fragmentation of cosmotechnics is the only way to avoid the ecological and existential catastrophe that the universal technological system is producing. This isn't hyperbole, it's a precise diagnosis of our situation. The universal machine's trajectory toward total optimization is incompatible with the conditions that make life possible. Either we cultivate technological alternatives that can operate according to different cosmic and moral orientations, or we continue accelerating towards systemic collapse. This means the moral imperative of technology isn't about making better individual choices within existing systems, choosing renewable energy, using privacy-focused apps, buying ethically sourced products. Those actions matter, but they don't address the deeper cosmotechnical question. The moral imperative is to participate in the practical elaboration of different technological possibilities, different ways of organizing the relationship between human activity and cosmic order. This requires philosophical work, political struggle, and aesthetic invention operating together, cosmotechnical practice in the fullest sense. Philosophical work that can think beyond the categories of modern techniques. Political struggle that can create institutional conditions for technological alternatives. Aesthetic invention that can imagine and materialize different ways of being with technology. None of this is guaranteed to succeed. The forces driving technological convergence are immense: economic, political, infrastructural. The universal machine has enormous momentum. But Hui's analysis reveals something crucial. The future remains undecided. The apparent inevitability of current technological trajectories is itself an effect of enframing, a way of foreclosing alternatives that actually remain possible. The question isn't whether cultivating technodiversity is possible. The question is whether we'll participate in holding open that space of possibility. Whether we'll engage in the difficult work of technological thinking that can imagine and create alternatives to the universal machine. Whether we'll take seriously the moral imperative that technology itself presents to serve life's plurality rather than reducing everything to standing reserve. This is the task ahead, not just for philosophers or technologists, but for anyone living within technological conditions. To think and act in ways that keep alternative technological futures available. To participate in the slow, patient work of cultivating cosmotechnical diversity. The task of thinking. We began with a paradox. Your smartphone connects you to everything, yet leaves you alienated from anything meaningful. Now we can see why. It embodies a cosmotechnics, enframing, recursivity, optimization that systematically eliminates the cosmic moral dimension that gives technology meaning. What masquerades as neutral efficiency is actually the crystallization of specific philosophical commitments about what exists, what matters, and how humans should live. Through Simondon, we learned that technical objects individuate, developing their own organizational logic beyond human intentions. Through Heidegger, we understood how modern technology reduces everything to standing reserve. transforming forests into timber resources and humans into human capital. Through Hui, we discovered this wasn't inevitable. It's one Cosmotechnics among potential others, a particular way of unifying cosmic order with technical activity that has achieved planetary dominance but remains historically contingent. Cosmotechnics names the possibility of technologies that express different understandings of reality itself. Chinese philosophy's Dao-Qi synthesis offers resources for thinking technology as cosmic resonance rather than mechanical control. Indigenous relationality suggests technologies that strengthen rather than sever connections with living systems. Islamic cosmology provides frameworks for technical activities that serve divine purposes rather than pure accumulation. Each represents not just different tools but different worlds. Yet we've confronted the immense difficulties. The recursive megamachine that absorbs alternatives into its optimization logic, the epistemological violence that makes other frameworks nearly unthinkable, the political and economic structures that enforce technological universality. When Chinese tech companies adopt Silicon Valley business models, when indigenous communities use smartphones, when Islamic societies implement Western urban planning, is this technodiversity or just local variations on a single theme? Hui doesn't offer easy answers. The recursive logic of digital capitalism operates precisely by incorporating difference, turning cultural diversity into market segments and resistance into innovation opportunities. Platform algorithms learn to simulate care, authenticity, even rebellion. The next time your phone prompts you to optimize something, your route, your sleep, your social connections, pause and ask, what cosmology is embedded in this suggestion? What would a technology based on different premises even look like? That moment of questioning is where alternatives begin. Not in rejecting technology, but in refusing its apparent inevitability, in recognizing that the phone in your hand expresses specific, changeable philosophical commitments rather than neutral progress. What can be recognized can be refused, resisted, reimagined. The Anthropocene isn't humanity's inevitable fate, but the product of a particular cosmotechnics that mistakes efficiency for wisdom, growth for flourishing, connection for relationship. Climate crisis, algorithmic governance, digital alienation. These aren't technology problems requiring better technology, but cosmotechnical problems requiring different relationships between cosmic order and technical activity. Hui leaves us not with solutions, but with a task: to think and build technologies that nurture plurality, that remain open to the genuinely new, that refuse the closure of the universal machine. This requires philosophical work, understanding how different cultures conceptualize the relationship between humans, cosmos, and technique. It requires political struggle, challenging the economic and institutional structures that enforce technological monoculture. It requires aesthetic invention, creating new forms of technical practice that embody alternative values. Most fundamentally, it requires recognizing that the future remains undecided. The recursive megamachine appears totalizing precisely because it colonizes imagination, making alternatives seem impossible or naive. But Cosmotechnics reveals that our current technological trajectory represents choices, not laws of nature. Other worlds remain possible. The question isn't whether technodiversity can emerge. The question is whether you'll participate in holding open that space of possibility, in cultivating technologies that don't yet exist, in refusing the seemingly inevitable convergence toward a single technological world. Every moment of questioning the optimization imperative, every choice to prioritize relationship over efficiency, every attempt to think technology otherwise contributes to this larger project. What world will your tools help bring into being? That remains the fundamental cosmotechnical question, the task of thinking that Yuk Hui's philosophy places before us, not as individual consumers choosing products, but as participants in the ongoing historical process through which technical activity and cosmic order continue to shape each other. The phone beside you, as you sleep tonight, embodies one answer to that question. Tomorrow offers the possibility of different answers, different technologies, different worlds. The work of thinking cosmotechnically is the work of keeping that possibility alive,